Hello everyone, and welcome. When writing a piece of software, there are a number of tools that you use in the process of writing it. And one of the most important tools is a code editor. Whether you use a simple text editor like Vim, an IDE like Visual Studio, or an interpreter in an editor-shaped trenchcoat, editors lie at the heart of the programming process. Code editors are often taken for granted, but what if you didn't have one? In this series, I'll be building a text editor from the ground up, starting with just a terminal, a few commands, and some programming languages. And in the process, I'll be exploring topics like text buffering, rendering, highlighting, and more. So, let's get started. For this first stage, I've written a basic line editor using only the terminal. Since all I can do in the terminal is append lines, recreate files, copy files, etc., I had to start very simple. This line editor will allow me to insert lines, remove lines, and save the file, and that's it. I wrote this first editor in Bash, which in retrospect might not have been the best idea. I had very little experience writing code in Bash, and not even really scripting experience with it. And this, coupled with the fact that I could only append to the file and had to recreate or copy from a previous working version of the code, made this process very slow. It ended up taking about 4 hours of actual typing, and the amount of time I spent working on sheets of paper was, I didn't bother counting it. I did learn a lot about Bash, enough to say I'm not really a fan, and if I had to do it over again, I'd probably use Lua, but what's done is done. So, let's go ahead and take a look at the code itself. Alright, if I open up the editor itself, you can see that it shows line numbers. You'll notice there's no tabs or indentation. I can't actually insert tabs using the tab key. I would probably have to use the /t or \t in order to get that to work. And I frankly just didn't really want to bother. So that's something I'm going to have to work on in a future version. For now, it's not really that important. But anyway, so the editor can insert lines if I press I, and then I'll provide a line number and a line. It can also remove lines by pressing R and then providing a line number. S saves the file, and Q quits the program. So just taking a quick look at the code, first it loads the file's contents into a string. First loads the file itself, and that's one issue here is that I can't actually run this without providing it with a file name, otherwise it'll probably break. So none of the inputs in this editor are checked. I just decided that that was extra work that I didn't really want to bother doing, and it's not like it matters because I'm the only one using this. I don't think I'm probably going to release this, but anyway. So once we've loaded the file's contents and we get it into a string buffer, it moves into the run loop. And once we're inside the run loop, I have the buffer printing line by line with the line numbers. Then it gets some user input and checks if it's one of the 4 letters that it's looking for. So for insert, once you've selected a line number and the content of the line you want, it just loops through the buffer, creates a new buffer by appending each line in succession, and then once it reaches the line number that you selected, it just puts that line in there and then the next line after. And this is very inefficient. I wouldn't recommend this if you're trying to make a serious editor, but for this case, it's very easy to write, and it's not really that important because I'm not planning on doing any heavy lifting with this editor. And I'll be looking into text buffering, like I said earlier, in a future iteration. Similarly, removals are done by iterating through lines of text and then removing the selected line. Saving the file is done by echoing the contents into the original file and replacing the contents of the original file. And this is where the first of the major problems I had kind of reared its ugly head, and that was not using the -E option. This option makes it so that the echo command will interpret escaped characters like new lines or tabs. Without this option, all of the lines were getting mashed together, which is a slight problem when the very first line of the editor is a comment. And so basically it was just completely destroying my entire editor and ignoring all the new line characters that I had there. So I had to figure out how to kind of separate those and make it all work, and figured it out eventually, but it was a little bit of a challenge initially. And then the second issue with the echo command was not using -n -n prevents it from appending a new line at the end of the command, at the end of the contents. And without that option, it was just appending a new line every time I saved. And the file would grow larger and larger and would move the text out further and further away from the terminal. So that was a bit of a pain. I also ran into an issue trying to insert new line characters themselves, because whenever I would try to do that, it would insert an actual new line. So, go down a line, go to the beginning, rather than the new line character, which is the /n typically. And so escaping with a backslash, like an extra one, also didn't seem to work. In the end, I solved the problem by just appending the characters one at a time, which is kind of silly looking, but it does work. I also ran into an issue with just kind of bash syntax, not understanding it. Probably could have learned a bit more before trying this, but, throw yourself into the deep end sometimes. I found out that single quotes and double quotes are not as similar as I initially thought. Also, if statements and while loops are both very strange in Bash. Definitely not my favorite language, a lot of weird syntax. But with these problems solved, the editor was done. So, now that I have a basic editor, I can move on to the next stage, which is a proper terminal editor similar to something like Nano or Vim. Probably be writing this in C++, but we'll see. And this one's probably going to be a multi-episode affair, because there's a lot of topics that I would need to go into in order to make a proper terminal editor. So, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.